This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Haulin Assets podcast, episode number 187. This is the first episode we've done in some months, and I, for one, am glad to be back. I, of course, am Craig, your host. Over there, he is Chris. Chris, welcome back.
It feels good to be back. Although we're kind of off to a rocky start here. It's been a little bit difficult remembering everything that we have to do, and
we are. Let's just say that much like driving a truck, hosting a podcast it's a muscle. It takes muscle memory. It takes practice, and we're out of practice. So we're going to do the best we can. All right, Chris. Where have you been? What's going on? People have missed you. I've gotten comments.
We have gotten some comments, and I've missed doing the podcast too. But I'll tell you what. When we originally decided to take a little bit of a hiatus, I definitely needed a break. The break has been nice. It's kind of helped to recharge my batteries, but the break has lasted a lot longer than I expected. You know, one, it was to kind of give me a break. Two, we're planning on revamping the show, and we're going to use this as a good kind of break for that, to relaunch. And we're going to talk a little bit about that near the end of the podcast. But, also, fourth quarter just kind of got busy. We had a lot of things going on, and then we had the holidays, and, now things are kind of settling down. We're going to get back into the groove, and there is a lot of really good, cool things I think we've got coming down the pipe.
Yeah. And, we're going to talk a little bit later in this episode about kind of what direction you're thinking of taking the show and what we're going to be doing with it. But for today's episode, I think we want to get people caught up on what's been going on in the world of Haulin Assets, right? What happened in that busy fourth quarter. And I know that you guys have made some significant changes in your operations outside of the most important one, which is the podcast. But with that little thing called actually driving trucks around, you guys have made some shifts in how things have operated. So we'll get into some of that. Let's see, what else are we going to cover? Well, we got to talk about financials. We've missed 3 or 4 financials in a row. And so we'll do a little catch up on that as well. What else are we going to be hitting?
We're also going to talk about changing the changing market, what we've seen in the last month or two, what I kind of think is going to happen in the future going forward. We did have a pretty significant accident during this time period. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then also, like we've already mentioned, we'll kind of close it up by talking a little bit about the relaunch of the Haulin Assets podcast, what's coming down the pipe, and kind of the vision for what that means and what that's going to be.
Okay, absolutely. So for those longtime listeners out there, this episode is going to be pretty familiar, right? I'm just going to be over here cracking wise. Chris is going to be over there explaining stuff. But going forward, we're going to have different topics and different structures and all that. So things will sound pretty different, but it'll be nice to ease ourselves and everybody else into that a little bit, Chris.
Absolutely.
So let's get into some main topic stuff. I think let's start with the financials, get people caught up just on the state of the business in those top line numbers. And then we can dig into what some of those numbers mean and how they came about. Sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay, so yeah, why don't we start? The last one we did, I want to say, was in August.
It was August. Right? August financials was the last financials episode that we did. In fact, I think that was the last episode that we did. So I've got all the numbers for September, October, November, December. We're gonna look at this from a high level view. I'm going to talk about what the net income was, and then the rate per mile that we saw. If you want more details on the financials, all the financials for all 4 of those months is going to be in the show notes for this episode. So you should be able to get all the meat and potatoes if that's what you want to see.
Yep. Okay, absolutely. So starting in September then, let's just go right on down the line with the top line profit and loss number. What was in the black, in the red? Let us know how it went starting in September.
So September, we had a profit of $23,428, and that was a $2.16 a mile rate per mile that we got all across the board. So, a halfway respectable September, better than average for the year, but still not anywhere close to where we ultimately want to be.
Okay, and then October?
October was a loss, down $6,143. There were a lot of additional expenses in October because
that sounds to me like a really big wreck.
Yeah,
because the rate per mile was
better. Yeah, $2.26 a mile, which is closer to where we really want to be, but not ultimately. We still want to be better than $2.26 a mile. That's one of the things that we'll maybe talk a little bit about. But that month, because of all the additional expenses, we still had a bit of a loss in October.
Okay. All right. And then in November, where are we sitting?
November was a profit of $12,877, and that was at $2.18 a mile.
Okay. So closer to that September number. And then December.
And December was actually one of the best months we've had in quite a while. Even though we had a relatively low number of miles, it was a net income of $27,818. So really kind of right close to our cash flow break-even point. That was, but the rate kind of dropped back down. The rate per mile wasn't, that much better. It was $2.16. So not as good as it was in October when we had a loss. But we still, expenses lined out well that month and saw a pretty healthy profit.
Very nice. Okay. Well, let's talk then now that we have the lay of the land. So just to recap, we had 1 month in October was a loss. The others were at least nominally profitable, even if they weren't quite where you were looking to get. But 3 months in the black, 1 month in the red, right?
Yep.
So I know we want to dig into that wreck and the ramifications of that and how you dealt with that. So let's save that for a little bit and talk about other changes that you spent the last quarter making. How I assume these are changes that are meant to affect that rate per mile primarily, right? That's the number that you're attacking first and foremost.
Yeah. Like
I assume miles run and rate per mile.
Yep. Yeah. So ultimately, one of the things that we did, I spent a big chunk of October. Like I spent a ton of time in October of really looking at the lanes that we run, the shippers we use, the brokers we use, which ones are most profitable, which ones aren't. And then specifically a lot of the lanes and kind of the loops. So, some of our lanes are out and back. Some of them will go out somewhere, then take another load to another place, maybe another, one trip out from Utah may result in 4 different loads. Some of them may just be like that out and back is just 2 loads, 1 load out, 1 load back. And the other ones that are 4 loads are like 1 load out and then another load to another place, another load to another place, and then maybe finally back to Utah. And so I kind of really looked at those from a lot of different angles to really see, which of those lanes are consistently getting us the most profit, what rate per mile are they getting us. I reevaluated our cost per mile. I reevaluated what rate per mile we really need to be consistently profitable. I found a lot of that. So like the rate per mile that I feel like we really need to be consistently profitable now is more like $2.40 a mile, where a year, maybe last time I did this was probably a year and a half ago, maybe even closer to 2 years ago, it was closer to $2.25 a mile. So, we've kind of set that new target at $2.40 a mile, all in round trip. That's where we want to be.
Is that number, so increasing it by 15 cents per mile, is that about your internal expenditures, et cetera? Or are you talking about external factors like inflation? And it's like, hey, we haven't looked at this in 2 years and the dollar just isn't worth what it was 2 years ago, that sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot of that increase is really because of inflation. Our cost per mile has gone up, but we also looked at, what's reasonable, because the 240 honestly is still not ultimately where we'd want to be. That 240 a mile is where I think is realistic that we can, the company's long-term sustainable and we're a target that we can hit in this market that's still really a suppressed market.
Okay. All right. And there are so many rabbit holes I want to chase and fall down into. Like, the market. But let's resist for a minute and talk a little bit more about the changes that you made. Okay, so you were assessing all of these lanes and loops that you guys were running. And I have to assume that's both what kinds of loads and what kind of shippers and receivers you're working with, but also regionality, right? Going from Utah to fill in the blank has to mean something, right? Yeah. We talk all the time about individual states like Oregon or whatever. But is that factored in as well? Like, hey, we can't do New Jersey anymore or whatever.
It is. And that, that ultimately is kind of one of the things that we realized is we've pretty consistently hauled loads into the Southeast. So whether that was, states like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, the further back east we get, and then, trying to get out of those areas, a lot of the times, 2 or 3 years ago, we would have an okay option out of like Pennsylvania. So we would go from, say Utah to Florida to Pennsylvania, and then sometimes from Pennsylvania, 1 or 2 more loads to get back to Utah. And we've just found a couple of things. One, the rates that we're getting are killing us doing that. And we're better off if we do go into the Southeast, just to come straight back home. So even if it means that we're getting I'm using kind of fictitious numbers here, but just to show the difference, even if it means that we're getting $1.40 a mile instead of $1.80 a mile, we're way better off just cutting that corner, not going up into the Northeast, and going straight back home and taking the hit. Because what that also does is we found on the way that we were running things, that actually saves us about 2.5 days worth of transit time. So we make up for the difference in lost rate by
gaining time.
Gaining time, meaning that now instead of our trucks spending 2.5 days on crappy rates, they're getting back to Utah more quickly and being able to spend those, you're kind of transitioning those 2.5 days of crappy rates onto 2.5 days of good rates. So we're able to kind of turn the fleet on a more regular basis towards good paying loads.
So let me see if I can restate this. Allow me to be the idiot on the podcast for a minute and make sure that I'm getting this. When you talk about the routes, the loops that you're taking and that we're losing you money, was it the regions themselves? Was it the total distance that you were running? Was it the number of stops that you're having to make? The number of loads you have to do on that loop? I guess what I'm getting at is if I'm driving truck in, the Atlanta area, am I hearing you say, well, we're not going to the Southeast anymore, and going, oh, well, crap, that's where I'm at, right? Would that Atlanta trucker be able to take what you're saying and say, okay, so maybe I don't go all the way to the West Coast. Maybe I draw a kind of soft circle around my region and the adjacent ones and not try to go cross country, right? So spell out for me kind of what this means for other people listening.
That's a good question. And it's different for every person in every market. And it's going to depend a lot on what shipper you're shipping out of. Like if you want to be successful in the trucking industry, at the bare minimum, you need to have consistent shippers, like direct relationships with shippers out of the area that you're hauling from. Like if you're based out of Atlanta, Georgia, you need to have good relationships with shippers out of Atlanta. And that's going to get you the best paying freight leaving Atlanta. And, a lot of times going from Atlanta to, let's say going from Atlanta up to New Jersey pays crappy, but then because you've got a relationship with a direct shipper, that crappy pay is not quite as bad. And then loads coming out of New Jersey back to Atlanta pay decently well. So you have to look at the entire loop, right? Or the entire out and back. What is your blended rate to get you all the way there and all the way back? And does it, like I said, ours is $2.40 a mile. Are you able to get that $2.40 a mile? And if you're not able to get it out of that lane, you need to look at switching towards other lanes that can get you that. And that's really another one of the things that I found in this analysis is, there were some lanes that, were getting us, maybe $2.50 a mile, a round trip, everything, where other ones were getting us 210, 215. And so it just causes us to shift our focus from, less of those 215 a mile lanes and more of those 250 a mile lanes. And that's ultimately going to, I think bear some pretty good fruit and help make us, more profitable.
And ultimately, this is in part about tightening up the number of days and hours that trucks are sitting around, right? Where if you have multiple stops along the way, you're doing a lot of sitting in the yard, loading and unloading. That time the truck isn't moving. If you're doing multiple stops, or am I thinking of it the wrong way?
No, that's part of it. So part of it is how much time a truck's actually, the wheels are turning, right? That's when you make your money, is when the wheels are turning. So limiting the amount of downtime, whether that's the number of drops on a load or the time between loads, is going to make a big difference. One thing I've always wanted to do that haven't ever really done is we actually put this is what it costs our truck to sit for a day when it should be running. Like, there's a difference between sitting for a day because the driver's off and spending time at home. We don't really look at it that way. It's if our driver's out on the road and wanting to be loaded and can't move for one reason or another, those days cost us $400 a day.
Oh, wow.
That's not like fuel expense. That's not anything. That's a combination of your fixed expense and loss in net income by having that truck sit is $400 a day.
It's what economists would call an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So,
that makes sense.
We put a number to that, and that helps us make better decisions.
Well, let me ask you one more follow-up question on this before we get off of this subject. You said, I haven't done this exercise in a while. It's been a year and a half, almost 2 years. What's the optimal cadence for this kind of analysis?
I should not have gone that long without doing that, because the market changes so quickly. For right now, for the meantime, I'm going to do it on a monthly basis. And really, it doesn't take that long. It's not that hard to do. It's maybe once you kind of have a system down, and if you're only doing a month at a time, it's probably a half a day's worth of work. And so for the foreseeable future, I'm going to do it monthly. And I think that's ideal. If you can just do it once a quarter, that's probably at a very minimum. I do that once a quarter.
Okay. Well, maybe that would be a good cadence for us to revisit the topic, and on future episodes of the podcast is a quarterly, calculating your rate per mile and cost per mile, I guess, would be the best way to go. Anyway, something to think about. We'll get to future topics in a minute, Chris. All right. Anything else you want to mention on that topic that we've been going over? Just
that it is something that we'll revisit, dive much more deep into in some future episodes. It was really good learning experience, but I kind of want to see things run for a few months before I really kind of talk about the pros and cons of it, the benefits, and what everything we learned from it.
Okay, excellent. Well, I mentioned not falling down this rabbit hole, but now it's time to do that. And that's the state of the market, what you're seeing out there, both for Haulin Assets and yourself, but also for people listening, any insights that you have. How has the last quarter been? How's it been different? And do you see any changes coming down the pike?
So we definitely saw a much better increase in rates in the fourth quarter than we have seen in the last couple of years, especially, at least for us in reefer, in the first, in December, we really started to see it super strong, and it's lasted at least the first half of January, seeing much better, stronger rates, more realistic rates. So that's just another one of those things that shows that the trucking market's at equilibrium. As soon as there's not, as soon as capacity, or as soon as the demand shifts any little bit, the capacity is low enough that it causes rates to increase. We saw that, and so I think that shows that the capacity is at equilibrium, and we're going to see good things continue throughout 2026. 2025 we saw a little bit of a rate increase across the board throughout the year. Not huge, so you didn't really feel it a ton, but there was probably a good 5 to 10% rate increase year over year from last year to this year. And I think you're going to see at least that much in the year coming forward. One of the big things is, you start to get new freight contracts between, shippers and brokers and shippers and other carriers. And we're going to start to see those come online. And because we're at that capacity and everybody sees that, that's going to help them to negotiate stronger rates, which ultimately a lot of that's going to flow down to the carrier. And we should see even better increases in 2026 than we did in 2025.
Okay. All right. Chris, can I ask finally about the accident?
You can ask.
Is this a painful subject?
It's still a bit of a painful subject. And there's still some unknowns with it. So I'm going to use, I guess the attorney answer here. It's still, we can't go into the details of what because there's still a lot of unknowns in the situation. But ultimately, we lost a truck and trailer. Our driver's okay, the other driver's okay. So ultimately, it didn't cause any major issues that way. But we are down a truck and trailer. No plans to replace those in the near future. So we're down to 10 trucks. But ultimately, those kind of things are just, you hate to see that kind of thing happen. This is really our first major accident that any of our trucks have been involved in, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. You mentioned no details. Can you give me a region or a state where this took place?
It was in the Pacific Northwest.
Okay. Yeah. It's especially in the winter. Oh my gosh. People listening, they know better than even I do probably, although I did grow up there. But yeah, driving in the Pacific Northwest is a lot hairier in the winter than people from the Southeast might expect.
Yep.
Right. Well, sorry to hear, but I guess we'll keep track of that and how that's affecting the business going forward. Although, silver linings, Chris, as we're talking about, financials and whatnot going forward, it's really nice to have a round number. So when you have 10 trucks instead of 11, it makes the math a lot easier.
It does make the math easier. Yep.
So, like I say, at least a little bit of silver lining. I guess perhaps we'll get a little bit more detail on that going forward. But for now, it's enough to know that we're down a truck and trailer, and that sucks.
Yep.
Okay. So, Chris, let's talk about the relaunch and what you want out of this show going forward. And if I may, what our listeners want out of this show going forward. So I'd be interested to know, and I didn't do any of the normal housekeeping stuff at the beginning, but let me do it now and tell people that whether it's on Spotify or on YouTube or especially on Facebook, I think that's where you're most likely to see stuff, Chris. Let us know if you've listened to this show for a while, or frankly, if you're new to it and you think, this is the kind of topic, this is the kind of subject matter that I wish they would cover more often, that would have more of an effect on me personally as I'm trying to make the jump into owner-operator, or I just did that 6 months ago and I need some more guidance. Let us know what you want out of it. But for now, I can't hear them yet, Chris. I don't know what they're going to say. And so it's just up to you. What are we going to do with this show?
That's a good question. So here's some of the things that we plan on doing. One, probably try to make the length of the episodes a little bit more standard, between 20 and 30 minutes, not too terribly long. Ultimately make them a little bit more fun and entertaining.
Great. But, pressure's on for me.
Yeah, because that's your job. I'm the nerd business guy. You're the fun, entertaining guy. But really kind of get back to our roots, right? We kind of started this whole podcast over 6 years ago, really focusing on the owner-operator realm and being an owner-operator. And we've kind of veered away from that a little bit as Haulin Assets itself has grown. But we want to really get back to that owner-operator piece. And I've said this before on the podcast, I really like that word owner-operator because it really encapsulates what this is for what an owner-operator is. You've got an owner that focuses on the business side, the same person doing both roles, the owner role and focusing on business. Then you've got a driver, the same person driving the truck, just like a driver that's working for a company. And so, I think we've done a pretty good job over the years of really focusing on that business side of things, but I don't think we've done very much. We've kind of neglected the driver's side, especially since I've been out of the truck and haven't been driving. And so we want to, still hold true to the business piece, but really honing in on the owner operator size market, not necessarily the fleet. But we also want to do a little bit better job of really encapsulating the lifestyle of a driver and owner operator that's a driver as well, and talk about some of the lifestyle things. What can we do to make life better on the road, from a driver and lifestyle standpoint, and talk about some of the good, bad, and the ugly that happens there, some of the fun and entertaining that happens there, some of the heartaches that happen there, all that kind of stuff. And that's really kind of what the overall vision that we've got for changing the podcast as we relaunch it.
This all sounds great. I'm on board. Love it. There's only one request I have.
What's that?
That we have to keep, and that's stories from the road.
Yeah.
I still want to hear Haulin Assets stories from the road. In part because they can be entertaining, but also if people go back and listen, or if you've been listening for a long time, there are some really great hidden nuggets. Maybe not so hidden, but I'm thinking of there was that parking lot in, was it South Carolina or Georgia, where it was just this nightmare, and it's
North Carolina.
North Carolina was
right outside of Raleigh, if I remember right.
And those little nuggets where it's like, hey, if you're in this area, do not go here, or hey, this is a great place to fill up if you're in the middle of freaking Nebraska or something, right? Or with the best hooker in Ogallala. That's a reference you're going to have to go back and listen for. But I think those tales from the road are really fun and helpful often. So I demand that we keep those, Chris.
They are good. And I can give you one today, a little short one.
All right.
But also not just my stories, but we'd love to hear from some listeners. Like, what are some of the fun stories or experiences that you've had on the road? But like today, middle of the winter. And for those of you, if you've never traveled through like the Wisconsin, Minnesota area in the wintertime, that's like a whole nother level of cold, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we had a driver up there, he's actually been up there for a couple of days up there this morning, and the reefer quit working. And ultimately because the fuel gelled. And so, ended up, it was actually one of those things where he was halfway loaded, almost all the way loaded, when he realized there was an issue. Luckily, the temperature, the ambient temperature outside was pretty close to the temperature that the load was supposed to be at. So I just had him get loading, went straight to a Thermo King, got the fuel flowing again, everything working. But I'd love to hear some customer stories, either stories regarding your fuel lines gelling up, and some of the things. What are some of the things that you do to prevent it? I mean, I know we all do additives. When you get up into that part of the country, you're getting diesel number 1 instead of diesel number 2, which should help with that. But what are some other tricks of the trade that you use to make it so that your equipment stays running in cold weather?
Love that. Okay. And of course, by the time we get those, it'll be spring. No.
We'll have to save it for next winter.
Yeah, get it to us now. Perfect. Well, Chris, anything else that we want to cover on this episode before we call it and get busy on a rebrand?
I think that's about it. And it actually, it's like getting on a bike. It actually went fairly smooth once we actually got going.
Yeah, you know what? What people don't hear is that this was the 7th take. Okay, that's a lie. No, not too bad. Thanks everybody for coming back on board with us. I'm glad to be back, and I think for somebody who was following in your footsteps, Chris, the last 2 or 3 years of the podcast were incredibly valuable. But I'm really excited to get back into the owner-operator territory and kind of have a little bit more universal utility for some of those folks who are trying to break into that role and go out on their own. So I'm really looking forward to it. I hope everybody else is too. The last request I'll make before we go is a direct appeal to our listeners, which is, as you've heard us talking about what we're going to be concentrating on. Now, yes, we do want to hear from you on what your suggestions are, the topics you want us to cover, but send this to your friends, your colleagues, other people who are out on the road who maybe are considering that jump to owner-operator. That is the best way that we're going to grow and reach new audiences. So yeah, I don't do this all that often, but a naked and blatant appeal to rate us, give us 5 stars on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever you listen to us. Give us that thumbs up, give us those 5-star reviews, tell your friends, and let's get this show, if you'll excuse me, Chris, back on the road.
There you go.
And get those wheels turning again.
I like it.
Okay. All right. See you next time.
See you then.
Yeah. Here we go. This feels weird.
You're wanting to clap.
I need to clap. I don't know why. Okay.
It's the what is it? The Slavovian? The
Pavlovian response?
Pavlovian, yeah. It's that principle.
You start clapping and I immediately salivate? Is that what it is?
Or do the intro.
You clap. Yeah, I'm down the block and I hear somebody clap and go, welcome everybody. Yeah. All right, here we go.